Gambare, gambare, hiruda.
Good evening and welcome to Key Radio Live. We have finally gotten through our first Keyverse book club, a year and a half into the server existing. How about it?
I know, right? Like, I created the book club role, like, at the conception of this server, and then
Per my suggestion, by the way, before I was even a mod.
and I retired, without any book clubs to my name, and then all of a sudden Lucia becomes owner, and he just decides, let's do a book club. That's how he winds up my entire run.
No, in your defense, Loopers is the first new English translation we've had since Keyverse was created.
Nope, so. Rewrite Plus, but Rewrite Plus had a do I dare say it? It had
a rocky launch.
It had a very rough launch.
Yeah. So
fun memories.
Yeah. Oh my god, I have to read what Andre says. You guys know what letter starts the word live from Key Radio Live? Yes, it's L. And what else starts with L?
Exact. Loopers.
Woo! Let's go.
All according to plan.
Oh, thanks, Laser.
That just means that we can't do anything that's not in Key Radio, meaning Summer Pockets can't have a book club because it doesn't have any of its letters in Key Radio Live.
Too late. We've already started planning it. Okay.
Well, yeah. I'm super excited for the Summer Pockets book club because I'll actually be there for every single episode. Like, there will be no questions asked.
You will be one of the regulars for it since
I will be like
work, right?
Yes. So between Heaven Burns Red and Summer Pockets, those are both my favorite keyworks. Both for very different reasons, though. Summer Pockets is the one I hold the most dear. HBR is just an absolute blast, and I'll probably end up talking about it with Loopers because I do have some things to talk about. Oddly enough, with Heaven Burns Red, that pertains to Loopers.
That's interesting. I'm a bit shocked about that, but we'll definitely get deep into that. So. Biggest thing is I kind of just want to talk a little bit about Keyverse's reception to the VN, and I am very, very pleased with it. It seems like most people agree that it's got some issues, but liked it overall. And given how much flack it got at its original launch in Japan, I'm very pleased with how well it's been doing with the English community.
I do have a feeling that in the case of Loopers, I feel that what ended up happening in Japan is the people who were reading it, especially in the English community, had an issue of not realizing that this was one part Ryukishi 7, and one part just the standard keyword. And the issue you run into with that is if you're expecting one or the other, you're not going to get a very complete version. It is this weird amalgamation of both very normal key tropes, but also very standard Ryukishi 7 mystery. And I love it because Ryukishi 7 is historically a key fan. So it felt like him being able to sort of write his own take on a key story. But overall,
he did some of the earliest fan art of Misuzu, which is just amazing to me.
Yeah, he loves Misuzu, and I respect that.
Misuzu is historically his favorite key heroine that he has not written. So,
yes.
Someone said Loopers went badly at launch. It didn't do bad like financially. What it ended up happening is a lot of the English community sort of just went, eh. Most people were either I keep mixing them up. RO7 fans that felt like it wasn't really his best work in terms of his mystery. Those are people coming from Higurashi or Umineko and stuff like that. And then there's a lot of key fans who are coming in not really knowing much about RO7 who are like, this isn't that great of a key work. But as someone who loves both RO7 and key, I thought it was a brilliant mix and a nice change up.
Right, yeah. Mm-hmm. So what it really comes down to here is, as a key work, it is simple, you know?
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's incredibly straightforward.
Yeah,
it's the easiest key work, honestly, to summarize, like, the entirety of its plot.
It's concise, yeah. And it doesn't really, like, hold much because, like, half of the premise is, like, the big mystery. So like you get your base. It's not like Lunaria where you basically have to be completely blind to it in order for it to hit. It's like there is a mystery that's given right off the bat, and you're left to think about it and where the story goes.
Funny you bring up Lunaria. I actually do think that you can go into Lunaria with minor spoilers. It will ruin quite a bit of the visual novel, obviously, because Lunaria actually relies a lot on the shock of the twist. That's not a bad thing. In fact, it is one of my favorites. But I do find it interesting that in the case of Loopers, it relies a lot on deducting the mystery. But like in the case of Lunaria, in its case, it relies more on the shock of the twist and how that twist recontextualizes the first half of the visual novel. Which is pretty standard fare for Key. But in Looper's case, we don't have a lot of that recontextualization. But what we don't have in recontextualization, you get in once you know the twist, you go back and reread it, and you see foreshadowing you never saw before. And it's really cool.
It's Ryuki Shi's, like, it's his trademark. That's what he does.
It is honestly okay. This is gonna Lucia, but don't get mad at me. It is what I hoped Lucia's route was, because in my case with Lucia's route, it felt like the mystery part was like sort of there. It was fine. I enjoyed it, but it definitely.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think Lucia the girl is better than Lucia the route. I think almost everyone agrees with that. Unless you just hate tsunderes.
I like the route. Am I the one am I the one who's actually going to defend rewrite here this time?
I like the route too.
I love Lucia's route. I will talk about my opinions on, because this is the only key work where we get to like really compare one route to another in this case, because it's a writer that has written a two very controversial key works, honestly.
Yeah. I'm going to read Spiral's comment. Somebody said, that was me, by the way, who said that Loopers is like a Pixar movie. And what I meant by that is that its themes are written on the walls, basically. Like, it's very obvious about what it's trying to tell you, which the end of the story is basically trying to say here, tomorrow, it's worth waiting for tomorrow. It's worth loving tomorrow. And it's like the temporal spiral, we'll get deep into this a little later, but the temporal spiral is very much targeting people who are afraid of moving on, afraid of the future, and also just kind of want more time to live in this endless today. Like we see it with Mia, with the with her disease, Simon with wanting more time to do research, Tyler with just wanting more time to have fun, Leona with not wanting to move on to university. Like they all have a reason to just want more time. And Loopers is just trying to say, yes, but life is going to go on. Learn to love the time you have.
So here's my take on Loopers. And what's funny is I do think the Pixar movie comparison is apt, because Loopers, unlike a lot of key works, Loopers actually gives its thematic statement within the visual novel itself. Like whenever you're reading the visual novel, there will be a line in Loopers that pops up that you're just like, that is the mission statement of the entire visual novel.
There's not a lot of analyzing to do with this one.
But I will say in that, I feel that there is actually a very beautiful theme about it, because it is being very plain and simple about one aspect, and that is if you keep wasting time trying to make more time, you end up wasting the time you could be using to its fullest.
Yes, exactly.
And that's what I love about Loopers, is it's not necessarily a story about like don't fear the future, but rather like you can be scared, but don't waste time being scared. Like even if you are worried about the future, that's just all the more excuse to make the most out of the now. It's why the loop is honestly such an interesting allegory for it, because it's more an allegory for perpetually trying to buy yourself more time. And yeah, you're having fun in that first half, but it's kind of ultimately meaningless. Like you're not doing anything. And I think that's what's the cool part about Loopers, is it's trying to tell you, if you keep constantly fearing moving forward with life, you get nowhere.
I'm gonna point to one scene that happens in the middle, and just I've already accepted that we're gonna be jumping around a lot. But when you see the CG with Hilda and Leona when Hilda's trying to wake up Leona. You have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, something like that, little scenes of Hilda just talking to Leona, and every single one just Ohio, Leona. And she's getting more and more heartbroken and then into apathetic. Like, if you listen to those Ohio Leonas one after the other, you could see a very clear progression in Hilda's demeanor toward it, which is just shout outs to her voice actor and all the voice actors.
The voice direction in this game is honestly some of the best in Key.
That scene kind of like, that was probably the most emotional I've gotten with Loopers personally, because like that scene just, that scene really hit me in a different way. I just like, it's one of those things like you can't really imagine it until you like really let it sink in and think about the fact that Hilda has been doing this literally hundreds of times, and like every minor like intonation of her voice and every like the expression and her like little like the way she changes and eventually just breaks down slowly but surely, and it's just heartbreaking. And like you get the feeling that this is truly like her best friend, and the fact that she's willing to do this to this extent says a lot about their friendship. But also, humans have their limits, and as much as you care for someone, you will break doing something like that again and again and again, and it's just watching that tore me apart.
I think it's an actual interesting commentary on how many of us fear change, but yet whenever we actually get that same thing day in, day out, and we do the same thing, we say the same things, you know, we think that would be perfect, nothing changes. We end up just hating it because I think we as people want change innately. We get bored of things. It's why we're constantly seeking out new things, things that stimulate us, things that make us like, that's why I constantly consume media, because sure, is every piece of media gonna be the best thing I've ever seen? No, but I constantly want to experience something. It's like, and I think that's the case with most people. It's why most people get invested in these franchises, because we just are like, we're fixated on the new. And as much as we love to say, oh, if life could just stop changing, if that were the case, I think we'd all be very bored.
Yep. Definitely agree with that. And I think it's really important to the overall message of the entire story. I think I love that scene. It's heartbreaking, and it conveys so much.
I think that scene does what I was trying to get at earlier. That scene delivers that message better in 5 minutes than Tomoyo After did with its entire last arc.
Yes. So here's actually what I was going to talk about. Loopers as the revival of the kinetic novel brand. I feel is very important that it was the first, because what Loopers sets up for Lunaria is that these kinetic novels feel more like very impactful movies than they do visual novels. Like, I could see Loopers.
They're so cinematic.
They are very cinematic. We get to see the glimpses of that planetarian level cinematography, but now with the budget of a full price visual novel. Because here's the thing, you cannot tell me that Loopers was much cheaper than a normal visual novel, and you cannot tell me that Lunaria was not super expensive, because its CG count was more than Summer Pocket's original release.
It's a lot, and you can tell that these Connect levels are not only high budget, but like if I recall correctly, the entire point of Connect novels from the get-go by Key was to make essentially visual novel films. Like if a full-length visual novel was like a TV series, then the kinetic novel would be like a film in sort of its storytelling.
Yes.
And that was the case for Planetarian from the get-go.
Harmonia, not so much.
I argue Harmonia can fit into a film-like thing, but you also have to remember that Harmonia wasn't written by Key; it was written by a fan, and it was
Harmonia also had amazing cinematography. Though it's like the one thing I can
I
can really praise about
though,
it.
if you look at Loopers versus Planetarian versus Harmonia, I would still say that Harmonia is the least cinematic in terms of just raw visuals.
I
There's a
would
lot
say
of
Planetarian by far.
Planetarian at the very least has a lot more animation going on in the background. Like
Not really. You have the rain in Planetarian, and in Harmonia you have the dust.
but the sprites don't change as much. Like in the case of Yumi,
True.
even if she's looping through very similar sprites, her expression is constantly changing. In
Right.
Harmonia, they're not, which no spoilers for Harmonia is actually a very interesting foreshadowing to the twist of Harmonia, but
Never
at the same
thought of
time,
that. But yeah.
but I do think that it is something that makes it feel less cinematic and more still overall. Because like when I think of Harmonia, it vibes more of a like a standard key work, like visually than I do. Because Summer Pockets, oddly enough, is very cinematic, like for a
Yes.
full length visual novel. And I
The
think of
lighting
Harmonia.
especially, I'd say, yeah.
So, but back to Loopers, I do think it is sort of the embodiment of what modern key can be. It is very cinematic. And is it like the classic works? No.
No.
Loopers feels nothing like the classic works, but that is not a bad thing because honestly, I don't think we're ever going to get that again. Like something that is quite on the same tonal level as Air or Clanad because it's just a different writer from a different time.
It's got some similarities with Little Busters, I will say, because like besides Little Busters, this is probably the next best group dynamic we've seen in Key, I would say, you know, and that's a bold claim, but I'm going to stand by it.
31A and HBR is pretty close as well. Like 31A from Heaven Burns Red,
which I haven't read, but I would definitely believe it based on what I've seen.
Platty might be able to confirm with me, but
yeah,
I mean, I agree, but you also at the same time have to consider length. And I think for the length, Loopers did what it did as best as it could have.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
100%.
Like
Loopers
considering this was like 10 hours.
Loopers abused ensemble cast in a good way. It used the ensemble cast dynamic so that none of the characters needed to be particularly deep for you to get attached to them because you got attached to the group more than you got attached to individual characters.
The only characters that I would say really have some deep development are Tyler, Mia, and Hilda.
Yes.
Like, and that's okay.
That is fine.
I'm totally okay with that because those three in particular have such good development. Tyler with bringing everyone together, you know, in the spiral and helping save them from boredom. You know, Mia with learning to love tomorrow, which is the kind of the crux of the whole thing, and Hilda with, you know, overcoming adversity herself. You know, we see her learning to overcome the boredom, and not just the boredom, but also the despair too.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, the reason I wanted to bring up Heaven Burns Red at the start of this episode and why I think Loopers and Heaven Burns Red have parallels in of themselves, but I wanted to talk about it on a meta perspective because I notice a very weird sentiment right now in the Key community, not necessarily in the server, but just generally online, where there's a lot of people really hoping that Key can eventually capture the same feeling of Canon, Air, and Clanad, like that original three. And I get it. Like, those are iconic for a reason. They are many people's introduction to Key, even to this day.
And but many people's favorites.
But I don't think we ever will, and here's why. Those writers, even now, who still write for Key, Maeda, Kai, brilliant writers. They've written some amazing stuff in recent memory, but it's still completely different than where they were at. And I think it's because Key will never be able to go back to where they were in the late 90s, early 2000s, because that's where they were in the late 90s, early 2000s. That's not where they are now, especially as like Kai and Maeda grow older. Maeda's gone through a lot since Clanad. So we're never going to get another Clanad. Even though I love Heaven Burns Red, for me to say it feels anything like his classic works would be a complete and outright lie. It's one of those things where writers change so much over their life that wishing for them to go back to this, like, sort of era that we have a lot of nostalgia for, while understandable, it's unrealistic. And Loopers is an example of this, not because Ryukishi07 can't write something that I feel feels like classic Key, but I don't think Key as a company wants to go back to it, because the thing is, I don't think it would be as successful as people make it out to be. Like, you know, you have the people that would go, "Oh, I would love this like classic Key work," but you already have your people that Summer Pockets, which was the closest thing we got to a sort of classic style Key work, already complained about it feeling like it was mirroring old Key works too much. So I feel like they need
did it better. What?
I'm not here to say neither here nor there, because that is all subjective. But I will say,
I agree with that. I'm just kidding.
but I will say, because of that, I don't think that a classic, like a really classic Key work that was really meant to pander to like classic Key fans, would necessarily be all that successful. I think Key benefits greatly from learning how to evolve with their style while still maintaining that essence. And Loopers is a work that does it great, but it also sets up Lunaria to do it perfectly. Like, if
Yes.
I could put an example of what I think a gateway modern Key work is,
Lunaria.
it would be Lunaria.
No
And
question.
Manpig, I don't know if you agree with this. Do you? Like, if I'm thinking,
I
like,
agree with it, but I just want to say, let's not get too much into Lunaria. Let's save that for when the translation comes.
oh no, I'm just saying, like,
Fair.
I'm sure we'll all want to talk about Lunaria, but that's another podcast for another day. Because
I'm talking about
You need
Lunaria,
to
like, as
stop
the setup that
two
Loopers
of us
gave.
from talking about it constantly.
Yeah.
I sort of put Lunaria and Loopers in the same thing because they release so close to each other, and like they represent a very distinct shift in Key's focus for me.
I'll give Loopers this too. And like when you were talking about the classic Key works, like one thing that came to my mind is something I was actually talking about with Cold a couple of days ago, about canon, and that what makes canon so special to me is that it's a work that can only really work in 1999. And I think Loopers is that work that can only really work now. Like, if they tried to make another Loopers 20 years from now, it would flop, I think. It is, and that's kind of matching with its narrative. It's about living in the now. So
I will say the reason why I brought up Loopers and Lunaria is because they bring up two very key points that I think now definitely separate Key as a company. We now have neoclassic Key, which is a term I am coining now, and I will keep using, which is our Summer Pockets, our Lunarias, and to some extent Kami-sama Day, where they're like, they have classic Key like vibes, and like they try to be like closer to classic Key work while also still being kind of new and fresh and different, where they don't quite match that, but they are still like, I would consider them closer to the classics than Loopers. Then we have our works like Loopers, Heaven Burns Red, and Rewrite, which I have always classified as this weird new experimental era of Key. And I love the fact that Loopers finally said, no, we will still keep experimenting. Because Loopers is very different from anything we've really seen from Key, and I love it. Like, I absolutely
I'm gonna read a couple of comments real quick. Platty says, static characters are a thing not everyone needs to change. And I love this. And this is something that we've talked about a lot with Joe, Holly, and Read Upon in the book club. And then these three in particular get probably the most flack out of anyone. And and I'm just gonna say it, like, this is the one criticism of Loopers I think is just complete garbage. They are side characters.
They are labeled as such.
They are side characters.
They're basically the equivalent of Sunohara from Clannad.
Let me just put it this way. If we were willing to praise Planetarian for having Yumemi being a very strictly static character, I think we should be far more forgiving in a cast of 8 that there are 3 static characters whenever it has a runtime that is only 3 times as much as Planetarian.
Yes.
Like,
exactly. I have some points on that, but that's a whole other discussion, and it's not here or there. Is that I do agree with this point. I'm just not entirely sure about the whole Yumemi thing, because Yumemi is a very differently handled character.
Oh no,
in
I
a
agree.
very
I'm just
differently
saying,
handled story.
if we are
You
willing
made
to
me-
praise static characters in one work, I don't think we should be all that disappointed when a cast of 8 has a couple characters that don't get their development time because they're not meant to.
And the thing is, all of them do still get their moments in the spotlight when Tyler is making the treasure hunt for everybody and, you know, tries to get them all out of their funk, you know.
Yeah.
He specifically hones in on what Holly needs, that about the kind of content she likes to make, the when they go to the little restaurant. And for the record, I would watch Holly review Little Hole in the Wall restaurants all day long if I could.
1000%.
And then with Read Upon and getting her to draw the thing she needs to, and then Joe didn't need anything specific because he's just along for the ride, you know. That's the kind of guy he is.
I think this also brings up a very interesting point in online discourse. There's a very much a wide gap becoming, like, that's happening between valid and invalid criticism. And I think it's very important to make a distinction. A valid criticism is judging a work based off of what is there. Like,
Yes.
if you have, like, in the case of Tomoyo After, I judge it strictly off of what it is, not what it isn't. In Looper's case, a lot of the criticism we get for it is about what it isn't, not what it is. And I don't think that is valid criticism because that's criticizing something that outright doesn't exist. You need to criticize and break down what Loopers is before you can really start complaining about what it isn't. And most of these people don't try to break down what it is.
Now, that's not to say there aren't valid criticisms.
Oh,
for
there
Loopers.
are valid criticisms for
There
Loopers.
are.
Loopers has its fair share of issues. Its prologue is an absolute pacing nightmare.
Yeah.
It did not find its pacing until, like, what is it? An hour and a half?
When the actual loopers come in.
Yeah, like, it did not find out it didn't find its pacing until, like, after the prologue.
I still think the prologue is pointless.
Oh, the prologue is 100% pointless.
I wouldn't go that far. I do think it's too long.
It should have been executed completely differently. It's just as it is, it's just a complete tone shift, and it feels so out of place in the keywork.
It does, but the thing is, it feels like, I don't think, Uttori, you might have, but I'm not sure if either of you have read Kaleidoscope of Phantasm Prison, which is the visual novel. You have, okay. It's the visual novel Ryukishi made immediately before Loopers. It sucks. It's not. It's really bad. It's basically like you take Hinaway Itoru characters that look like they belong in Little Busters and put them in a torture chamber, is basically what it is.
I'm good on that forever, thanks.
Yeah, let me just put it this way. It's Moon done badly.
Yeah, and definitely done badly with no real reason to exist. There's no themes to it. But I will say the opening hook to it is wonderful when they first get thrown into the room. And I think Ryukishi was trying to do a scary opening hook in Loopers, and it did work. It's just, this isn't the type of story that needed that.
Now, I will say, it is horrifying, but the issue with it is the fact that it doesn't follow up on it. Like, it is literally the example of, what is that term? The gun. The gun. What's
Chekhov's gun.
Chekhov's gun. It is a tone shift that happens once and is never followed up on, and it feels completely just there. It is one of my favorite moments on a first read, but on a reread, I'm like, this goes nowhere, so I don't want to read it.
Oh, the Sagashiona thing, mostly because they try and make her seem creepy when they're seeing her around at first, before later revealing that it's just Mia going through the loops, you know, after everyone else has left the spiral.
Yes, exactly. So it's one of those things where I do think that the prologue is a bit weird, but that is a valid criticism because that is judging what is in the work. I think an invalid criticism is going, oh, why didn't we get more scenes with, like, these side characters? And it's like, well, the scenes aren't there, but judge the side characters based off of how they are in the novel itself rather than
Platty says Joe felt weirdly relatable for me, even though I feel he had the least time. And I definitely agree. I connected with Joe a lot more, especially on a second read.
I feel like Joe is the embodiment of like the people who are just along for any ride that they're there. Like that's me with Key is like, even if I'm not 100% excited, like I'll be honest, Stella of the End, I have mixed feelings on how I'm going to feel about it. Like I'm typically able to tell how I'll be able to feel about a key work when it's going to drop. Stella, I cannot read. Like I cannot read it from a mile away. It is weird how not neutral I feel, but almost like I have no idea what I'm going to feel about it. And that scares me because typically I have a very good read. I knew I was going to love Summer Pockets, knew I was going to love Loopers. I knew I was going to adore Lunaria. So it's like, this is the first time in a while where I'm like, I have no clue.
Yeah.
What's going to happen?
That could be a good or a bad thing, I'd argue, though. It depends on
It
how
can be a good thing. Yeah, no, it's just one of those things where it's like, even despite not knowing, I'm along for the ride. I'm like Joe in that case where it's like, I don't need anything in particular. I'm going to read Key because it's Key. Like I wasn't particularly interested in Prima Dolls. And now it's like sort of like this niche thing that I really love knowing a lot about. Same with Nekogari, honestly, because that is an underrated key work.
I'm really excited for that.
I want to read Nekogari so bad.
Same.
It is the closest tonally we'll ever get to classic Key or classic Maida again. And it's honestly because he's brutally honest.
And I honestly think that's a good thing.
And HBR has a lot of brutal honesty. It's just very different. Chapter 2 of HBR felt like very Maeda, but it was also uber depressing. So it was like, oi, oof. Like I still cannot think of chapter 2 of HBR without just my heart sinking.
I might have to actually play a bit of devil's advocate because I have heard a bit of criticisms from people with the side characters, not because of their expectations, but because I guess for some people, time is sort of necessary to build like a genuine relationship. And while I don't agree with the fact that you need to have a super developed cast for every character to shine, I can understand the people who are saying, I get what they're going for, but I'm not quite as sold on it. Because, let's be real, for some people, they do want their cast members to get equal spotlight if they're gonna be, like, making this a group dynamic. And I think that's a valid thing to think about. And
so here's what I think about it, because I do think that can be a valid criticism, and it sort of is in the case of Loopers. I'm not saying if you feel that way that you're right or wrong, by the way. I'm just saying, like, it's like one of those things where it doesn't really detract from the quality of a work. And
no, it doesn't.
It's mainly because in the case of Loopers, it's very clearly not trying to go for individual characters as much as it is get you attached to this group of characters and how they interact. Because realistically, I view Loopers as almost a stereotype of a friend group where you like, it's like, you know, that meme where it's like, there's one of each of these in the friend group. It's like that. Each of these characters are very much like almost stereotypes of the summer vacation friend group. But what's cool about it is that they're sort of trying to get you attached to that. Like that idea of, oh, this is a summer vacation friend group. I don't want it to change. So that the pain is whenever that does change and you're like, it's not quite the same. And I think that's what most people, and this is why
they're honestly excited about the fact that they like when they realize that the spiral's about to end. One of the first things that I think it's Holly who says it, we should all meet up sometime.
Yes.
You know,
it's one of those things where I'm like, it's great as a group dynamic, but I think the standard of overdeveloping characters has worn our media like literacy thin to ensemble casts. Because the thing is, there are so few ensemble casts represented in modern media that it is hard to know what to do with it.
Yeah, I can argue preferring it. That's not something I'm saying, but I do think you need to like temper your standards and also see what you get so far. Because what
I
you
totally
have is
get
pretty
wanting to
good.
develop
Yeah.
characters.
Yeah.
Like one of the reasons I love Summer Pockets Reflection Blue is because it developed the characters that I really wanted developed from the original Summer Pockets.
Boy, I
She
can't
did
wait for that.
And that's also a work that benefits from having a developed cast
Mhm.
where all the
Right.
cast members have depth. In fact, but Summer Pockets also does have a case of spending a bit too much time in one of the routes with a character without developing them much and thinking that time will equate to attachment, and it doesn't necessarily do it right. I'm not going to drop names, but it is one that I have recently reread.
We're gonna be dropping names when we get
The
to
book
that
club
week in
comes.
the book club.
I might step out of that book club because I have far less nice things to say about that route, and I don't want to bring it down.
Hey,
But
you can't get worse than Manpig screaming about Tomoyo after on this podcast.
yeah, but I will not bring it up in this episode because it is not about Loopers, but I will say that Loopers actually doesn't have an issue with underdeveloping its cast as much as it does. We don't know really how to deal with ensemble cast because the only one we've ever had was Angel Beats, but Angel Beats was bipolar on whether or not it wanted to develop its cast or leave it ensemble.
Yeah, and I don't. It's hard for me to really figure out why, but I felt a lot more connected to the Loopers cast as an ensemble than I did the Angel Beats cast.
Well, it's because Angel Beats had cutaways. Angel Beats had constant cutaways from the main cast to do these side stories with these characters, which wasn't a bad thing because Yui's arc in Angel Beats is great. The issue you have with that is that it takes time away from the group dynamic that would otherwise have more time to flourish. And that is why I say Angel Beats is an ensemble cast that doesn't know that it has to be an ensemble cast because it tries so hard to develop characters like Yuri, Kanade, Otanashi, Hinata, and Yui that it takes time away from other characters that would benefit from just having group scenes. Like the fact that Sheena has a grand total of like 10 minutes of screen time in Angel Beats is horrible because she benefits so well from group dynamic settings.
Right.
So
and Loopers doesn't have this issue because of how the characters play off each other, I guess.
Yeah, there is very rarely a scene where the majority of the cast is not on screen. Like
once they're introduced.
Yeah, once they're introduced, but like once the Loopers are the Loopers, they stick together for the most
You have this one section like for maybe an hour when like right at the end of the first half that's really focused on Tyler and Mia, but that's kind of because we need their relationship to be believable for the second half to work. So I actually
100%.
think that was a really genius decision to just like get us some time to get used to our leads, give us a really sweet moment at the Ferris wheel, and then bring everyone back.
The reason why I do think that is also important is because it makes the cutaway feel all the more impactful. Because the thing is, in Loopers, it sticks out because it's one of the rare moments where they're alone. But in Angel Beats, we don't ever have that because we get constant cutaways all the time, which makes it feel weirder that the entire cast is there in Angel Beats. And the only reason I'm comparing Loopers and Angel Beats is because they are the two ensemble keyworks.
Right,
technically.
Like, I'd argue Little Busters has more of an ensemble in the anime adaptation, but yeah, because most of the roots in the visual novel they focus on one character at a time, not like the entire cast. It's mostly in the common route where everyone's interacting with each other.
One thing I will say that the Little Busters anime did well, and I get why people don't like it, but it works in the anime, is the fact that they incorporated the entire group into the Little Busters routes for the characters for the most part.
I love that so much.
I love it a lot because it
personally.
made the anime develop the cast sort of by proxy, because the thing is, you fall in love with the group dynamic in Little Busters because of Common and how they are in Common for the most part, and that's their introduction, but you can't spend the entirety of the first season of the anime doing Common. You have to get into character routes. So incorporating the group dynamic into the character routes actually makes it a very ingenious move on the perspective of making it an anime adaptation.
I love it. I actually like this aspect of the anime more than the visual novel.
I do too. I think the anime's direction was really good, and I think Ryukishi took some notes from it. If I'm being honest, Like,
Okay, so this is actually a good question as we get a little deeper into the episode.
and then we'll read. I want to read what Platty said, but go ahead.
So Loopers, I think, is pretty likely to get an anime adaptation. Most Ryukishi works get one, like most major Ryukishi works get one, and this also has Ryukishi and Key behind it. So, would we want a movie adaptation or a 12-episode anime?
Here's the thing. For the existing story we have now, I don't think it'll be a 12-episode anime because it'd just be too short.
It would.
I want a 12-episode anime that has anime original scenes.
Yeah.
That's what I want to for Loopers.
But if I was thinking what would be most likely, I think we'd get like a 2-hour-long Loopers movie, and it would fit perfectly fine into that.
I would be happy with that too, you know?
I'd say like a Loopers TV anime would be something like the Prima Doll TV anime, where it's basically its own thing.
Yeah. But in the case of Loopers, where like canon isn't as, because the thing is with Prima Dolls is canon's sort of fluid, because they sort of just went, this is a magazine thing for the web novels so that you guys get to experience these characters and you can buy our merchandise. Well, and then they sort of like didn't say this was the canon. They sort of went, this is the content you get. Then the anime, I think, is going to be like our actual, like what we're supposed to treat as Prima Dolls canon. In the case of Loopers, it's not quite like that because it has a full story. Like, I think we can all agree that the Prima Dolls web novel, for those who have read it, is sort of like a collection of moments more than it is a actual story, a narrative. It has, it doesn't really have like an ongoing narrative as much as it has a collection of scenes, and there's a good
definitely not what Loopers is. Yeah,
it's literally just the main character interacting with these dolls, and hearing their stories, and that's it. That's the whole story.
Yeah, it doesn't have a connecting narrative thread, while the Prima Dolls anime clearly does. In the case of Loopers, it's not that, and it has a very clear thematic point.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to read what Platty said, because there is something that we definitely could dig deep into here. And then we're already at an hour, so I should start reading people's reviews from the book club channel. So Platty says, one thing I was a bit bummed about was we didn't get much more perspective swapping like we did at the start with Hilda and Tyler.
I do think it was missed perspective. I do think it was missed potential.
I don't necessarily disagree, but I also was not particularly bothered by it, because the thing is, Loopers is weird in that it's written in third person, which I've never read any other visual novel that does that.
I have visual novels that have switched to third person temporarily, but not entirely told through third person.
Yeah.
Echo, Chaos Head does it briefly. I actually think that the perspective swapping was the only missed potential Loopers really had. And there's a reason why, and it's because of the fact that they set it up, and I thought, oh, that means that we're going to get this really cool perspective swap at like the very end. And we didn't really get that, you know?
Well, we did. We got a whole section of Mia being alone in the spiral, which was very depressing.
It just didn't, like, I felt like we were going to see more from more perspectives. I thought they were going to do a thing where we got to see the perspective of each of the Loopers during that.
I would have loved that, and I honestly, but I don't think it needed that. What I do think would have helped a lot is if we saw Mia's perspective at some point before she was alone in the spiral.
Yeah. Either way, I do think that they could have perspective swapped more. It doesn't make Loopers a lesser work than it is right now. It's just like something I would have done that could have elevated it a little bit.
Sure. Because like from most visual novels are told from the perspective of the main character, but while Tyler's the main character, we don't see this through his perspective. So like you'd think that they'd do that.
There's literally no reason to not. Like it's not like Summer Pockets, where like the perspective changes that do happen in that novel are supposed to be like sort of shocking because of the fact that like you're in the perspective of Hyrie, so it's supposed to stick out. Like you're never in the perspective of someone's head in Loopers, so there's no reason to stick to one throughout the majority of it.
Yeah. All right, I'm just gonna read some opinions. We can throw some stuff around here, just some little things in the book club channel. Before I get into these, I really, really, really want to give a shout out to the Keyverse peeps, because this, like, our first book club has been a blast. Like, I had a lot of fun just seeing more and more people respond to this work, and respond mostly positively, which made me feel really good about how much I was selling it to people when I first read it back in November.
I was
So
admittedly very concerned about how Loopers was going to be received in this.
I was too, and I'm pleasantly surprised by how positive it's been overall. So you first.
I will say Loopers did benefit from the fact that y'all were in a stream talking about it, and that felt like
Not
the perfect.
Everyone was, but
but it did
but
feel like something that for people that were there, it makes the work all the more special. Because I know I fell in love with Canon 2002 the first time whenever it was our group watch that we were all together, and we, instead of like really complaining about it, we found things that we all collectively liked about it. And it was one of those things where I looked at it and went, wow, this isn't half bad whenever you're just taking it in for the fun.
Yeah.
Like, it's a version of canon I come back to the most, which is weird. Like, that, I'm probably the only person that comes back to canon 2002 the most.
I'd say as long as it's not the visual novel, it's understandable, because I think both of the anime are better than the visual novel, in my honest opinion. That's just me.
We'll get there.
We'll get there.
That'll be a podcast episode eventually, TM.
Yep.
Definitely once I get deeper into the HD port. So anyway, I'll start with Cold, since he's here in the audience. I wasn't fully sold at first. Like, the first 60%-ish or so was fun to read, with a couple really nice moments. In particular, really liked the part where Leona woke up. That was definitely my favorite part of the early section. But I love that part too. But the entire last bit following the escape from the vortex was so good, especially the part where the whole gang grouped together to search for the dinosaur eraser, and even the old members that came back. That was hype, and I was all there for it. Those final bits with Mia and Tyler were just the best. Single-handedly made me like it so much more than I would have. Those two relationships is just the sweetest thing ever, and it even had a perfectly satisfying ending. I'm loving this praise for the ending. It's like this story has a really just exciting climax. And that's one of the things that almost shocked me about it on my first read. I was not expecting the shonen climax, you know?
Loopers' climax is the embodiment of power of friendship, and that's all praise. Like,
it's so cheesy, but I love it so much.
It's Loopers. I don't really care. Like, it's one of those things where it's just good fun. Another thing I would like to say about like the praise towards the ending is it was really cool, because I think Senya Ichiya Vortex being the main theme of Loopers, it being throughout, and that song structurally sort of just vibes that song that like just really bolsters itself at the end. Because I think you know my opinion on it. The last third of Senya Ichiya Vortex, the vocal version, like, I always thought it thematically just fit perfectly with how Loopers was paced. It starts off fun, and then it just ramps up, and then you just blast off at the end, and it just doesn't stop.
Yeah, it's kind of fitting for what, you know, Looper's structure as a whole, you know?
The hype finale is something that Ryukishi does a lot. Like, that's just part of his thing. And I think in Loopers, he does it off really well. It's
probably one of his best versions of the hype ending.
I would definitely say that. You know, of the works of his I've read, I've not read Umineko. I've heard it also has an amazing ending, but
yeah.
Umineko's great if you can get through, you know, the 140 something hours that it is. Then again, I read White Album 2 and loved it.
I'm not looking forward to that.
White Album 2 is good. Just saying.
I'm not talking about White Album.
Oh, Umineko. Umineko's great throughout most of it, outside of like 2 isolated chapters. So like, pretty good. It's better than Higurashi. The visual novel, not the anime. I love the anime.
Yeah, Higarashi's anime better. Okay, anyway, Sep7. Shout outs to Sep7. I say that like every episode, but you know. I previously said I absolutely loved the friendship between Hilda and Leona. I didn't expect it to hit that hard. That scene we talked about. Seeing both of them on the bench with the passing loops, with Hilda breaking down, got me good. That kind of thing always works. Since it's my second run this time, I figured out that Mia would be sick and wouldn't survive to get out of the loop, and she'd loop a crazy number of times to explain the ghost. It wasn't far from the reality, but I didn't really expect her to loop with the other characters leaving and their memories being erased every day. That alone would have been sad, but this is a living hell. Fuck you, Ghost Tyler, for thinking it was a prank. I must say that a girl creating an eternal everyday life and asking the boy to forget about her is just the most key thing ever. Ryukishi must really like the studio.
He does.
I mean, he literally. If you read his interview about him writing Rewrite and him praising Key, he's like, he refers to Key not as like just Key. He says like my beloved Key. Like he is like absolutely beside himself anytime he gets to work with the company.
And honestly,
it's
respect.
The cutest thing ever.
He's living the dream. Like
exactly, yeah.
I'm really happy for him, and clearly he puts his all when it comes to writing for this company, because Loopers just hits so well.
And Lucia's route, even if it has its own issues, like it's not that he didn't try, it's just that was pure communication hell. Like that was less of an issue with
production was a mess. So
Rewrite's production was a mess, so that wasn't really his fault as much as it was just production's fault. But you can tell he put everything he could into making it feel like it was him and like a nice gut punch of Key.
And
Absolutely.
Even if the route itself had its issues, Lucia herself fits in perfectly with Key heroines. Like, she doesn't feel like an outlier in any way to me.
Says the Lucia simp.
I know, but like, am I wrong?
No, you're not. I just wanted to give you a hard time.
Yeah, I know. I'm used to it. Those are the two big ones I had. I do want to mention Spirals. Take here. The repetitive scenes are toned down, but still there. But there is an attitude of over-explaining things in this VN. Ryukishi wants to control what emotion we have at every moment. What do you guys think of that?
I don't necessarily disagree, but in the case of Loopers, because of the fact that it's supposed to be a very straightforward keywork, it's not that he's necessarily wanting you to. Like, he's not like telling you to feel a certain emotion as much as it is just Ryukishi being a very blunt, honest writer. Like, he is not a writer that leaves nuance in the emotional scenes. It's not like Kai, where the scene at the end of Summer Pockets leaves you with mixed emotions. Ryukishi just very straightforwardly and plainly.
The complete opposite, I would say here, is probably Suzumoto.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, and I know Spiral is a pretty big fan of his. So
Suzumoto is very complex, and that's not a bad thing, but Ryukishi's just very straightforward. Like, Lucia's route, he was pretty clear about, like, everything that was going on whenever it came to, like, the emotional scenes. You knew exactly how the characters felt, but, like, in the case of Suzumoto, you don't necessarily know how the characters feel about certain things. And I don't think that's necessarily Ryukishi over-explaining things as much as it is it's just a different style of writing. I'm sort of an in-between. I like leaving a little bit of, like, nuance to characters' emotions and how they feel, but like I'm definitely no Suzumoto level of complexity.
That's Maida or Kai, you know.
That is, yeah, I draw a lot of inspiration in my own writing from Maida and Kai. Kai in sort of being just brutal when it comes to emotional scenes, and Maida when it comes to the comedy. My comedy has been forever ruined by Jun Maeda.
Yeah, it's good stuff though, like HBR.
But no, I don't think Ryukishi ever really over explains when it comes to emotions. I think it is just blunt honest. It is like
things are written on the walls. Like,
yeah, it doesn't It's not like, okay, give me something that Suzumoto writes, and I'll give, like, just a random analysis of one of its scenes. I just don't wanna think of it on the spot.
Planetarian. Like that's the one that really where the
Yeah.
comparison is really coming to here because of the whole kinetic novel thing.
Case of Planetarian, I'll give a random scene. The scene where Yumemi is giving the projection. The projection scene is the perfect example of not really laying the emotions on the wall. He really does Suzumoto lets you figure out how you feel about it. He never tells you, like, the scene is never scripted in such a way where there is only one emotion to come out of it. Ryukishi's not like that. And Loopers, the scene where Hilda's going, Ohio, 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 and there's only one emotion to be drawn from that. There's no complexity there emotionally. You're just supposed to feel dead inside.
Yeah.
But
It's
it's
pain.
effective because it is concentrated. Same with a certain scene in Rewrites Lucia route where crap hits the fan. You're not supposed to feel very mixed emotions. You're supposed to feel one thing, and that's dread.
Yeah.
Complete and utter dread. Ryukishi wears emotional scenes on his sleeve. He's not trying to make a complex emotional scene. He's just trying to make a scene that hits you in the gut. If that doesn't work for you, that's you. But then again, that's where the comparison.
And also fair, but
also fair. It's just it doesn't necessarily make it a worse style.
Yeah.
It is a matter of taste. Like, let me just put it this way. Ryukishi feels to me like how Pixar writes most of its emotional scenes. There's no nuance there. You're just feeling.
Yeah.
And that's Ryukishi. Like, Ryukishi is the perfect example of here is scene, here is emotion that follows, here is next scene, here is emotion that follows. It is while Suzumoto is like, here is like 30 scenes and you can feel however you want about it.
The simplicity is what makes it easy to write, for him to write something that's relevant. Like, this is something, and this is what I'll talk about when I get into my own thoughts on this story and what I loved about it, is that this is a message here about learning to love tomorrow and not being afraid of it and not chasing the endless today, that for me personally hit me really hard. It's a relevant message that I think a lot of people can need to hear and can take a lot from. Like some of the more complicated stuff is not going to be relevant to everyone. I'm gonna point to Clanad for this one. Those who love it are gonna really love it, and those who don't are just not gonna get it.
Loopers is a far more universal work than Clanad ever will be.
Yes.
And that's not a bad thing to either Clanad or Loopers. It just means they're different. And actually, this is what I want to bring up. It makes Loopers a pretty easy gateway work. Like, between Lunaria is a bit more complex with its emotional scene.
This is something Andre and I were talking about. Like, he's like, my friend promised me he would read a visual novel. I was going to give him Planetarian, but now I'm thinking I'd give him Loopers. And I'm like, I would argue Loopers is a better key work to start with than Planetarian.
Here's the reason why I do think that. And I hate to bring up Lunaria again. This will probably be the last time I do. Don't quote me on that. Lunaria is a very weird case of it's a bit more complex than Loopers, but it's still a good gateway work. But Loopers is pretty easy because the amount of discussion that you and I have about the quality of Planetarian's visual novel, because of just how Suzumoto writes and his thematic prose, makes it very hard for me to actually recommend Planetarian to most people as a first key work unless I absolutely know they will love that type of story, simply because of the fact that Suzumoto leaves everything that you feel up to yourself, meaning you can love or hate it. And that's the case with pretty much any Suzumoto work, and to a certain extent Maida's work. But in the case of Ryukishi, it's very easy to tell how you're supposed to feel, and most people just sort of feel the way that the visual novel is supposed to make you feel. With Loopers, like, does it mean that it sticks out as much? Not necessarily, but it also makes it a very easy way for you to tell this is sort of how Key goes. And then you can get into the more complex stuff. It's like I don't want to call it the baby formula, but it's like the snack food. It's the popcorn food of Key. And that doesn't make it bad. It makes it really good, actually. It's just, it's not as complex. It's not as deep. And eventually you reach the bottom and you'll want more. And that's when you go read on to more key works. And I think that's great. We need a better gateway key work because the thing is, I think Loopers is pretty universal. Like, it is so generally good that like most people won't find things to go, oh, I hate this, I won't read any more Key. Well, I have had people read Clanad and be so bored or hate it so much that they will not read anything else Key.
Yeah.
I think a difference is also time investment. That's something that mattered.
Loopers invests its time far more into.
That's why I think making more kinetics was a good idea.
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. The more kinetics we have, the more introductions we have.
Yeah.
Yeah, because any kinetic I think is a good gateway work outside of maybe Harmonia, and that's just because Harmonia is shaky in general, in my opinion.
I recommend Harmonia to beginners occasionally, and they like it, so I don't know.
Manpig, we are going to have a blast on the Harmonia.
I think Harmonia is valid, but I just generally think kinetics as a whole, they are the best beginner works, period.
Man, if the three of us are on the Harmonia podcast, we will have the person who hates it, the person who's in the middle, and the defender. And I'm just going to be up in here like, all right, guys, calm down. It's okay. It's just Harmonia.
I don't like passionately despise it. I just think
you gave it a 3 out of 10. You gave it a 3 out of 10. That means you passionately despise it.
And then I read Atri and I upped it to a 4. So.
It's still a 4.
My heart. This is.
I gave it
Atri and Harmonia are the two ways Lucia hurts me the most.
I gave it an 8 out of 10. I know
Atri I passionately hate. Like.
What's weird is like my 8 out of 10 is like everyone else's 6 out of 10 for most people, because like anything that's like an 8 means that I generally enjoyed it, and then 9 and 10 are like rankings that are like you have to be really good.
Yeah, same. I'm in the same boat as you. So that being said, what did you two give Loopers?
9 out of 10, solid 9.
I gave it a 9 out of 10.
Great, but not a masterpiece.
Even on a second read, that's what I thought I was going to do, and yet I still gave it a 10.
That's valid.
I think its messages are just that good. Like,
and that's fair to you. If I can give Planetarian a 10, why can't you give Loopers a 10? As I said,
exactly. Like,
the more connects we have, the more different types of preferences we can offer to beginners, and I think that's not a bad thing. That's a very good thing.
Because the greatest thing about the kinetic novel brand, and this is why I did bring up Lunaria so much, is because now we have 4 very distinct gateway keyworks. And while I have trouble recommending Harmonia to many people, it is still 4 very distinct versions of Key.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that's a good thing because it covers pretty much every corner of Key we have, and soon Stella will cover a 5th. And with the kinetic novel brand being generally successful, I do think that we'll see more consistent kinetic novel releases from different writers, because nowadays I think Kai is going to become the main Key writer for main works. He's going to be the new Maida. Summer Pockets was such a resounding success. I think Kai is going to be the lead director now, and Maida will go to doing the more experimental projects that he wants to do. Kai is definitely the future of Key. Like Cold. At least I hope so.
Back to
we need to reel this back, and I have something I do need to talk about because we haven't been able to talk about it yet.
Actually, do you want to do that first? Because the thing I want to say is kind of what I want to end the episode on. It's the kind of note I want to end it on. So let's talk about the translation.
Okay. I'm excited because, as you know, if you've listened to me on any podcasts throughout the server, you might know that I am very opinionated about modern Key translations for the most part, in the sense that I outright think that most of them are not good. And this is not necessarily because I think that they are mistranslated. If you're going to read a keyword, most of the translations will be perfectly serviceable for getting the main plot. But The plot is
Absolutely.
not what a key work makes 90% of the times, and the atmosphere is what is everything about a key work. Air would not be air without its atmosphere. Thus, Summer Pockets would not be Summer Pockets without its atmosphere. And quite frankly, I think the official translation neutered Summer Pockets' atmosphere. And I had a lot of fears going into Loopers that the same thing was going to be true. I was pleasantly proven wrong. Loopers is a very
Yes.
charming translation that puts a lot of life into the characters' dialogue and makes the characters all feel distinct and individual without taking away from the meaning of the work and the themes that the work brings. In fact, I honestly preferred reading it in English than I did whenever I read it in Japanese, just because I was less fluent. And this is just coming from a perspective of things. There will be some creative liberties in Loopers if you switch between them. They changed around certain parts of the omniscient narrator dialogue to make it like fit in English order, because Japanese order is sort of reversed in some senses. I think it's fine. I think it's perfectly valid because you're still getting the core Loopers experience. You're getting the atmosphere. You're getting the characters. You're getting the charm, the comedy. You're getting the plot. The lore is not changed. Everything about Loopers is contained within this translation, while also managing to make all the characters read like they sound in Japanese, but in English. And I love it. It is such a brilliant thing that it really felt like they took the time to translate it. And I hope that they give this group of people more translation jobs in the future. I think it is a perfect example of what a key translation should be. And like the fact
It
that
is
most of the times when
particularly
you get a
noticeable with read
translation-
upon.
Yes. And a lot of time, like, and in the case of wanting, like, in the case of the fact that we need fan translations for us to get this consistently, I don't think that should be the case. I think we should be getting translations that really reflect the charm. Like, I will give Clanad's translation this, like its official translation. It does have a lot of charm to it because it actually takes time.
Clanad's official translation is wonderful, I think.
It is wonderful. It is not a literal translation by any sense. Like, it is not just telling you exactly what the Japanese did, but if you really wanted that, just read it on DeepL.
Exactly, yeah.
So, but if you want to read Loopers and experience it in English, this translation will give you Loopers, and it's in English. There's really no noticeable difference if you're reading this in Japanese or in English, tonally or meaning wise. And it's well worth that price tag. Like, quite frankly, I was so glad that I was not paying $25 for a haphazard translation that neutered the visual novel that I was reading. I was so happy, especially after a myriad of recent disappointments.
I mean, in terms of key official translations, I would say that we have only three that are really, really good. Clanad, Planetarian, and Loopers.
Yeah, Little Busters has its own issues. Summer Pockets has its issues. It does not feel like Summer Pockets at all.
Rewrites is pretty good considering it's Romeo, and Romeo is really hard.
I actually do think that Rewrite's translation now is okay. There are still issues with it, but it's less from the actual translation standpoint because they did fix a lot of the actual mistranslations and more that they still missed certain things like typos and stuff where I'm like, we waited how long for this? we waited how long for this?
They didn't even put in Google Docs where they had like a grammar bot like that helps you fix all of your typos.
Yes, we waited 6 years for Caesaru. No, it is Shizuru. I get it. Romaji's weird. Though, if that were the case, why is Yoshino not like spelled Yoshino? Like, I am very confused.
Why they mixed the two styles?
Why did they decide to use that version? But no, in general, I think that it was good. I was very happy with it. In terms of if I was gonna rank this in terms of fan translations, I think Air's is a little better. I love Air's fan translation.
Winter Confetti we're talking about.
Yes, Winter Confetti. Gao Gao's good, but it's not Winter Confetti. I love my Cockney British accent Haruko with
Yep.
all my life.
Same.
And I think that little bit of bias, Angel Beats is a little bit higher as well, but that is also because I worked at Angel Beats.
I think Angel Beats is one of the gold standards for key translations too, along with Winter Confetti, and also kind of Moon's translation.
And you've
I think
also read
really
Reflection Blue, so I don't know. I'm not going to say that. Reflection Blue is another gold
Reflection Blues is wonderful. I did read an early version of it when it did have more typos in it.
It is better now. Like, we have fixed hundreds of typos.
I read it a year ago, so I read it in a very early state. I do not think it is a fair judgment. I think it is a wonderful translation that just wasn't as high in quality as Angel Beats because I read it before it was done. So no shit. Like,
I literally gave it to you because I wanted someone to talk about Shiki's route with. Like,
Shiki's
I was like,
route is amazing.
Yeah. But anyways, that is my opinion on the translation. It has the seal of approval. Now you can end the episode.
All right, so I'm going back to book club and I'm going to read a little bit of my own review from it because it is kind of, I think, the right note to end the first book club on. So, I'll just say that even the happiest and most motivated people can lose hope after being trapped in an endless today within the temporal spiral. Yeah, and obviously Mia is a important part of this, since her scene at the Ferris wheel really was the first glimpse of not just the power of treasure hunting. Note how we didn't even talk about treasure hunting the episode, because it's a lot simpler than that. It's just the power of support. Sometimes what you actually do doesn't really matter. It just matters that you pass on the positive vibes you have, let the positivity and love and motivation spread farther and farther out, and feel good about doing that. It's my entire philosophy on life. It has been long before Loopers. You know, it's the happiness spiral, Komari coming through here. More of the VN reminding me of all the things I want to be for the people I meet in person or across the internet. And that's when I kind of had the realization that this community, the Keyverse community, is a lot like the Loopers. Because during that climax, when all the Loopers are trying to find the dinosaur eraser to bring Mia back from the spiral, all I could think about was going into our #serious channel, and if I see one of us down, everyone else will rush in and try and bring that person back up. This community is filled with good people who care about one another. And that's what the Loopers are trying to show. It's trying to restore your faith in humanity. So I get that not everyone is going to love it, but I hope y'all can at least see some of that. And at the end of the day, I'm going to continue to sing its praises. That's why I still give it a 10. And that's why I love this story.
I'm going to say something incredibly cheesy that'll ruin the tone of this, but the real treasure was the friends we made along the way.
And on that note, thanks for joining us for Key Radio Live.
Bye-bye.
Bye.